hostages have been released. Sadly, we are receiving reports now that a mother that was kidnapped, the father was kidnapped, the mother was kidnapped, the father was released a few weeks ago, I believe. The mother was taken captive with her 2 children, and we are now getting word that both the mother and the children, that many of us have been following their story, that they have both perished, all 3 of them, I should say, have perished, and that their bodies will be returned soon. We'll get an update on that from Aaron, along with some other news out of the Middle East. As many of you know, we have been going through a lot of our archives, and in some cases, literally going through boxes of material that have been stashed away in attics. And I wish I had been a little more diligent in filing some of this stuff away. I tried, but we've done a lot in the 35 years. Well, someone sent me a cassette tape. Now, this cassette tape, maybe some of you listening in Nebraska can nail down the time. I'm thinking, based on some research today, it was in 1982, 83, or 84. If I had to guess, it was 1982 or 83, in that time frame. Many of you may remember then there was controversy about a Christian school in Nebraska that was not licensed. The Christian school was not licensed, and the state legislature was debating whether or not they were going to allow private Christian schools to operate without their teachers being licensed. This school stood up and said, no, this is a violation of the separation of church and state, religious liberty, religious freedoms. And there was an interview that was conducted on a radio station in Nebraska between the pastor of this Baptist church and school and the state senator at the time, State Senator Peter Hoagland. The pastor was Reverend Everett Sullivan. It's spelled Sileven. Now, I gave the quote by Peter Hoagland in my presentations since the early 90s. I mean, I think it was probably in my first book in 1990, but certainly within my second book, which is my first book on education exclusively, in 93. And I was giving this quote a lot on radio, interviews I would give, speeches. And one day I was speaking in Jackson, Michigan. I was speaking for a Christian school and church. The church had a Christian school, and a good-sized Christian school at that. And they had brought me in to do like a 3-day event where I spoke on Sunday morning, concert Sunday night, full seminar on Monday evening. And and then I think I was doing some teacher training or something as well during the week. And while I was there, I received a phone call. Now, I don't remember if I received it on my cell phone or if I checked my answering machine when we used those back at home or what, but I received a phone call from the congressman's or the state senator. I'd have to go back and check by then. I think he may have been in the U.S. Congress by then, but he had been a state senator and went on to become a U.S. congressman from Nebraska, Peter Hoagland. He's now passed away. He passed away about age 65 a few years ago. But I received a voicemail or a communication of somehow from a staffer wanting to talk to me that I was attributing this quote to Congressman Peter Hoagland when he was a state senator in Nebraska. I'm just going to give it to you off the top of my head. I don't have any right. Again, this is a quote I gave so many times, so I'm going to be pretty close. The state senator then, Peter Hoagland, said, I don't have any quarrel with the right of the reverend or members of his flock to practice their religion, but I don't think they should be entitled to impose decisions or religious philosophies on their children, which could make it difficult for them to live in this complicated world when they grow up. Now, that's pretty close, okay? That's just off the top of my head. I gave that quote so many times over the years that I pretty much have it memorized. Now, there are quotes, versions on the internet I checked today that are not accurate. They use words like when they won't fit in with the New World Order and this kind of, that's not what he said. What he said was bad enough. It doesn't have to be enhanced. Now, what's very interesting is that I had somehow put out word that I wanted a copy of this. And if anyone knew of where there was a copy of this recording of this radio interview between the Baptist pastor and the then state senator, Peter Hoagland. I sure would love to have a copy of it. Well, lo and behold, in the mail, there shows up a cassette tape. And I've had it in my possession since the early 90s. And I kept it in my office on a shelf for the longest time because I always wanted to preserve it. Well, somewhere along the way, it got moved, and I didn't know where that thing went. I knew we wouldn't have thrown it away. Well, sure enough, I opened one of these boxes this week, and there was the cassette tape. So we had to order up a cassette tape player to grab that audio and other audio off of a cassette tape. Now, Mr. Logan, you've never used a cassette tape player till today, right? No. He says no. And I even had to show him how to put in the cassette tape and how it works. Now, any of you guys feeling old? Let's not give him a rotary phone. Would you know what to do with a rotary phone, Logan? He says he can figure it out. Well, I don't know about that. Do you pick up the receiver? Do you not pick up the receiver? Do you dial, then pick up the receiver? These are the questions he would have to ask himself, right? But anyway, interesting enough, I had to show him how to operate a cassette tape. Do you know, by the way, Logan, if you turn the cassette tape, you can record or listen on the other side? No, he did not know that. Yeah. So there you go. No, there's not two tapes. There's just two sides of it, I guess. You flip it over and you can listen and record on the other side. Isn't that something? So anyway, our technology is fascinating them in the control room. The guys in the control room are fascinated by this technology we had, guys. So anyway, today we pulled off the audio from that cassette tape. And I am going to play for you. I don't really, frankly, know if I've ever heard this. I may have, back in the day I received it, put it in and played it, but I don't remember. But I certainly haven't heard it in years and years. Now, why am I bringing this up today? First of all, because it's very interesting to look at the religious liberty battles that we have fought in America, even in the 1980s, during the Reagan administration, for the right of churches and parents to train their own children. But not too far from Nebraska is the state of Minnesota. And we have a lot of great people listening in the state of Minnesota. And perhaps you guys remember last year, I read an article that was carried at the Federalist. It's dated August 27th, 2024. And here's the headline. Under Tim Walz, that's the Minnesota governor, of course, it ran for VP with VP Harris. Under Tim Walz, Minnesota banned Christians from teaching in public schools. That's August 27th, 2024. See, this is germane to what was going on back in the 1980s in Nebraska. And trust me, my friends, this battle is not over. It's very, again, interesting that Logan is watching a lot of these things from the early 90s, my documentaries, my books, and now even this cassette tape. And he says, Dad, the things you were fighting then, you're still fighting today. It's just more intense and more prevalent what the left has done. Indeed, it is. So here's what the Federalist had to say in August of 2024 in their article. August 2024, here it is. Effective July 2025, teacher licensing rules passed last year in Minnesota under Democrat Governor Tim Walz will ban practicing Christians, Jews, and Muslims from teaching in public schools. Walz is now the presidential running mate of current U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris. His resume includes a stint as a high school social studies teacher who sponsored a student queer sex club in 1999. Starting in next July, that'd be July of 2025, this article, The Federalist, says, Minnesota agencies controlled by Walz appointees will require teacher license applicants to affirm transgenderism and race Marxism. Without a teaching license, so you apparently have to affirm those things to get a teaching license. And without a teaching license, individuals cannot work in Minnesota public schools, listen now, nor in the private schools that require such licenses. Now, that's very interesting, and I touched on that when I was living in Minnesota at the time. which I did for several years, went to a Christian school in Minnesota, got out, started writing my books, traveling and speaking for a lot of Christian school associations. And I was asked by a collection of Christian schools in Minnesota, would you please track the legislation in Minnesota and at the national level that would put any handcuffs on us as Christian schools when it comes to teacher licensure, national testing, and national curriculum? And I said, yes, I would. And I was retained by those schools to do that kind of work. As you know, I was doing many things, like a lot of you guys. I'd done a lot of things to make a living over the years. And that was one of them. Now, many of these Christian schools wanted to maintain their teachers as licensed teachers because they felt like they might have a better chance of appealing to the parents who pay the tuition if their teachers are licensed. So in other words, they felt like having teachers that were licensed made it more marketable to market their school, to promote their school, to give credibility to their school, to the parents that are paying this tuition. Yeah, our teachers are licensed. You have quality teachers here, they're licensed. That makes the parents feel good. I don't know if that would make the parents feel good today. Yeah, the government, we have teachers that are licensed by the government. Well, that would, I would hope, throw red flags with many parents. Really? So your teachers have been through all the queer, LGBTQ, queer perversion stuff. Well, that's a real problem with us. Why would we send our kids to a school that the government, which is for all of this, certifies your teacher as being qualified? Qualified what? To teach Marxism? Or to teach a Christian education, right? Well, the things were different back then than they are now to some degree, right? Many parents are now awake, finally. But the Christian schools that I was working with wanted their teachers, if they could, to be licensed. But many of those Christian school administrators said to me, Brandon, if there is ever in Minnesota or on a national level legislation that requires our teachers to affirm same-sex marriage, LGBTQ, these kind of things, multiculturalism, tolerance, moral relativism, situational ethics, to affirm anything that is contrary to our Christian worldview, our biblical commitment, we will not have licensed teachers anymore. That's what we'll do. We're not going to bow to the state just so we can say we have licensed teachers. So this is a battle that's been going on for some time. So the latest version of the regulations, and again, I would need to go check to see if these have changed, requires teachers to affirm students' gender identity and sexual orientation to receive a Minnesota teaching license. Now, this is very troubling because many Christian schools, universities, colleges per se in Minnesota, they're trying to teach a Christian worldview while also training young people to become teachers, which many of them are hired by the public schools. And if their students don't get placed in the public schools, who's going to want to spend money to go to their school and get their degree if they can't get a job when they get out? More and that tape from years ago, I'll play it. Hello, I'm Brandon House. Is the government tracking you? Do they have access to all your data? Well, if you go to worldviewtalk.com, you'll find out about a cell phone company that, well, does not store your data. They don't do that. This is what they're known for. They don't store your data. You have privacy. You're not being tracked. That's why a lot of folks are turning to worldviewtalk.com. You'll find their prices are very competitive. All the details are there at worldviewtalk.com. Again, worldviewtalk.com. Oh, while you're there, not only do they have cell phones that aren't tracking you, you can find out about how to get a satellite phone. Should the whole system go down,
Logan,
you want to communicate with a family member or a loved one, you might want to have a satellite phone. Or how about their solar generators? They have great solar generators. Check them all out right now. Worldviewtalk.com, worldviewtalk.com. All right, welcome back. Glad you're with us. Worldview Radio, our website, worldviewradio.com, worldviewradio.com. So before I play this audio, historic audio that I just heard today for the first time, maybe ever. I don't ever remember putting in a cassette tape and listening to it. Maybe I did, but if I did, it was, decades ago. But I'm going to play it because I don't think anyone has this. I don't think anyone has what I'm about to play. I think I'm the only one that has it. Because I looked forever for the original until I put out I even called the radio station and TV station. I think it was a TV station and radio station tied each other in Nebraska. And then when I put out the plea, somehow someone in Nebraska, I wish I knew their name to give them credit, heard my plea and sent me a cassette tape of it. Now, this was decades ago. Now, if you go online and listen and you search then State Senator Peter Hoagland and his quote about Christian schools, you'll find all kinds of versions. And some of them are very, very close to being accurate, but not fully accurate. You're going to hear it yourself. I don't think they wanted this. Now, I want to go back to the story. So before I get back to what's going on in Minnesota, because it's all tied together, folks, the same fights. We're still fighting them. So I'm speaking to a Christian school, a church that has a Christian school in Jackson, Michigan. And I get a phone call, and I was doing teacher training, as I said, during the week. Christian schools are bringing me in to teach on all of these trends in education, like outcome-based education, school to work, Goal 2000, what was going on, and the need to understand how they're going to try to do the very things that Walls is doing in Minnesota. I was warning about that in the 1990s, and Christian schools were bringing me in to not only speak to their students on the New Age movement, etc., but then to speak to their parents and say, parents, you need to understand what your administration and your school board at this Christian school is up against. And you better stay alert and let your elected officials know you want your parental authority. You want your religious liberties. And so they'd bring me in to tell the parents, you better be vigilant. And you better help this Christian school staff and administration. And you better spread the word to your family and friends, because otherwise you're going to a Soviet situation here where the government controls everything your kids learn, which means the end of your freedom of religion, your parental authority. And then they would also have me do seminars for the teachers to make sure the teachers understood what was going on in the trends. Well, while I'm there teaching, as I said, I get a phone call from the State Senator Peter Hoagland of Nebraska, who's now become a U.S. congressman. And somehow the word has gotten to the congressman or his staff that Brandon House is out there giving this quote that parents shouldn't have the right to teach their kids a Christian education in the Christian school. And he didn't like it, apparently. And he called, when I called him back, he let me know that this is a false statement, it's not true, and you need to quit saying it. To which I replied, really? Because I have a cassette tape of the interview, mister. To which there was dead silence on the other end of the line. Washington and congressional staffers lying. Shocker. You better be thankful when you have a good congressman with good staffers. And that's not very many of them. There's just a few. One of them is my buddy Congressman Glenn Grotham, who'll be on my show tonight. And his staff, the staff of his I've dealt with have been wonderful. His chief of staff, they've all bent over backwards to accommodate us, it's just been it's rare. It's a rare thing. So I'm very thankful for congressmen like Congressman Glenn Grotham. I'm very thankful for congressmen like Congressman Tim Burchett from my 2nd District of Tennessee. So there are some of them up there in their staff that are just really committed people, okay? And that's rare. I'm just telling you, as someone that has dealt with Congress and staffers for decades and have the pictures to prove it, including being up on Capitol Hill with and I got a picture to show you of me with Sonny Bono. And Sonny Bono, let me just tell you, Sonny Bono and I saw eye to eye. Ba-dum-bum. Like that one, Dalton? We saw eye to eye. Unlike some of these other guys I met with, like John Thune, who literally towers over top of me. He's a big fella. And I got pictures of that at the White House with him. He's a big guy. And Dick Armey and several others. They're big guys, a lot of them. But let me tell you something. Sonny Bono and I saw eye to eye. We were pretty much the same height. I may even have been just a tad taller than Sonny Bono. And what may shock people, by the way, on a side story, is that Sonny Bono, when we met in his office literally in his office. His family photos were on the back of the credenza. When we met in his office on Capitol Hill and dealt with his staff, which was another very easy congressional staff to deal with, Sonny Bono is one of the few members of the U.S. Congress that understood what we were explaining to him. Tom DeWeese, I think, was in that meeting with me and a few others. One of the few congressmen and their staffers, and particularly Sonny himself, to understand the role of communism in education and the merging of education with industrial production for a planned economy. To the shock of many, Sonny Bono actually was tracking big time. Now, I don't know if that's because he was, a guy that came out of Hollywood and the counterculture or what. Or maybe he was a student. Maybe he was a reader. Maybe he read. I don't know. But there was no trouble showing him what was going on and him believing it, not only believing it, understanding what we were saying. So I'm thankful for the good congressmen, some that have passed, and the good staffers. So this staffer tells me, you better stop saying this, it's not true. And I'm like, I have the cassette tape of him saying it, so don't tell me it's not true. Dead silence at the other end, call ended, he didn't know what to say, and I never heard from them again. Again, that was the early 90s. But I was attributing to the state senator a quote from probably 1982, 83. This is when this battle was really going on in Nebraska. But the concern was this was going to spill out onto states all across the country and require Christian schools to have licensed teachers by the government. Well, here we are, before I play the clip, back once again, as Yogi Berra says, deja vu all over again. Because in Minnesota, at least, as being reported by the Federalist, and we need to check to see if the law has changed, but accordingly, from the August Federalist article, this July 2025, the last spring, the administrative judges finally approved these pending changes. The Federalist reported 1 month before they were finalized. Universities are also affected, okay? Universities are also affected. Starting in 2025, they must either train their teaching students to fulfill these anti-Christian requirements or be banned from offering state licensing, and thus the ticket to the vast majority of teaching jobs to their students. Do you understand how this affects Christian schools? Since 2020 in Minnesota, teachers renewing their license, which is usually required every 5 to 7 years, must, listen now, demonstrate cultural competency. Similar to the requirements imposed in the 2025 on new teaching licenses, teachers renewing their license must, quote, show evidence of self-reflection and discussion of, end quote, topics that include, quote, gender identity, including transgender students, end quote, and, quote, sexual orientation, end quote. They must also show they understand, quote, bias, end quote, in themselves and their students related to race, sexual orientation, gender identity, and other cultural Marxist categories. Well, there you go. Some Christian universities in the state will obey these regulations, said Doug Seaton, founder and president of the nonprofit Upper Midwest Law Center located in Minneapolis. Some Christian universities will not. But so far, those UMLC have reached out to that plan to disobey these state standards, these state commands to violate their faith. And they'll do so quietly and only sue when the state finds and punishes them, Seaton said. Now, this is, again, kind of like, as I said, deja vu all over again. Because here we are, I'm going to go to an article I pulled up today. Here it is. This is the LA Times. January 5th, 1985, Nebraska High Court overturns minister's jail term for contempt. The Lincoln, Nebraska Supreme Court Friday unanimously overturned an 8-month jail sentence for contempt imposed on a fundamentalist minister after he refused to close an uncertified church school. Okay. The High Court ruled that the Case County District Attorney erred by handing down criminal contempt sanctions against Sullivan after he initially was charged with civil contempt. Sullivan was sentenced to 8 months in jail by District Judge Ronald E. Reagan. Isn't that an interesting name? I'm glad they put the E in there. Of course, President Reagan wouldn't have been a district judge. He was the president, but that's very interesting. Ronald E. Reagan for willful contempt. This was in April of '84. He served 37 days of the sentence and was later released on $10,000 bond. Faith Christian School was one of several uncertified Christian schools that operated in defiance of state law. It became a rallying point for protesters. The legislature passed a compromise bill in 1984, which has in fact ended the controversy. The new law allows church schools to operate without certification if they provide the state with information about teachers and classes. Isn't that interesting? I found another one dated, this is the New York Times. Nebraska Baptists defy state over school control. This is dated, what's the date of this one? Let's see here. January 9th, 1984. When a judge ordered 7 fundamentalist Baptists jailed 6 weeks ago and issued warrants for the arrest of their wives, their pastor and their pastor's daughter. He set to boiling a church and state dispute. That when a judge did this, it set to boiling a church-state dispute that had been simmering here since 1977. That was the year that the 150-member Faith Baptist Church opened a school in its basement without applying for approval from the State Board of Education. The dispute over the Faith Baptist Church School and about 20 others like it in Nebraska has aroused conservatives across the nation. It has spurred state and federal investigations and has threatened to spill over into presidential politics. In the meantime, Reverend Everett G. Sullivan, spelled again S-I-L-E-V-E-N, Sullivan, the women and 23 children are, quote, in exile, end quote. As Mr. Sullivan and his supporters put it, the women and children are in Missouri, while Mr. Sullivan is, quote, moving around a lot, end quote. He was interviewed Friday in a motel in Council Bluffs, Iowa. The right to worship claimed. From the church's school's viewpoint, the issue is their right to worship. The tenet of their faith is a God-centered education for their children, with the teaching of history, science, and even mathematics based on the Bible. Nebraska officials say they have no interest in impeding anyone's right to worship. The officials say the state's simply requiring that all schools, whether secular or religious, be approved and that all teachers be certified. Nebraska is among a minority of states that have such requirements. The Dr. Joseph E., and I have no idea how you say that last name, Lutterjemharms, the state education commissioner, said, quote, there are many ways of getting that certificate, but the schools and their people have refused to even apply to learn what is required, end quote. Now, the case got picked up by Michael Ferris, who at the time was working as a lawyer for Concerned Women for America. Isn't that interesting? I'll read a little more and then play the state senator's comments about what he thought were the rights or no rights of parents. Don't go on. We live in uncertain times. In fact, we live at a time when our own governments all over the world are warning us that there could be big problems with our power grid. World War III seems to be right on the horizon. Let me ask you this. Do you have a satellite phone? Should communications go down with cell towers? Do you have a satellite phone to get a hold of that college student or your spouse who travels, whatever it might be, to get a hold of your senior adult parents? We have satellite phones at worldviewtalk.com, and you get the satellite phone for free when you sign up for their very reasonable payment programs for the service. Sign up for the service with a reasonable contract, get the satellite phone for free. Worldviewtalk.com. You'll also find they have, well, what I now have, which is a solar generator. Yeah, I have a gas generator, an LP propane generator, but what if that goes down? I want to back up to my backup. So I now have a solar generator as well. You'll find them at worldviewtalk.com. Check it out today, worldviewtalk.com. All right, welcome back. Glad you're with us. Worldview Radio, website worldviewradio.com. All right, so the article from the LA Times, or excuse me, now this was the New York Times, January 9th, 1984. Now, isn't this interesting? This is all relevant, folks, because this is a battle that's going on apparently still in Minnesota. I just read to you from the Federalist. Looks like some of this is going to come into effect this year. And trust me, this is going to continue. This is going to continue. And this is why many of these schools were standing up then, because they're like, wait a minute. If we comply with you now in 1982, 83, 84, where we have to have our teachers approved by the state, how long before we have to worry about you telling us our teachers have to believe this and teach this? We're not going to do this. I'm sorry. Separation of church and state. You're not going to come in and regulate our church or our Christian parents of our church who have a school. Now, if you want to know, what we're teaching in our classes, come on in. We'll show you our curriculum. That's fine. Not a problem. I think you'll be quite impressed. But we're not going to seek your approval. Sorry. And of course, there ended up being a compromise piece of legislation worked out. I think this thing went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court declined to hear it. But the New York Times article picks up that Michael Ferris at the time, who was working as an attorney for the Washington-based Concerned Women for America, that'd be Bev LaHaye, is representing the Nebraska Christian school. He said he feared that other states would take heart from Nebraska's success in repressing Christian schools and begin clamping down on religious schools and on parents who teach their children at home. Well, isn't that what we're seeing right now in Minnesota? And I'm going to go and see if I can find the updated, see if this legislation in Minnesota is coming into effect this July, is still as we were told by last fall by the Federalist. Of the 300,000 school-aged children in Nebraska, about 200 attend Christian schools operated by, quote, fundamentalists. Don't you love how they use that? Their congregations and their teachers here and in towns like North Platte and Grand Island have refused to apply for certification. Their schools have been ordered shut. In North Platte last month, the Reverend Bob Gelsthorpe and his church were each ordered to pay fines of $200 for each day their school remained open. Mr. Sullivan, who is 44 years old, calls himself, quote, a Christian who practices the old-fashioned Bible-believing Christian faith as known since the time of Christ and practiced prior to the founding of the United States or the state of Nebraska, end quote. Mr. Sullivan and his fellow fundamentalists, he said, oppose abortion, communism, socialism, the proposed federal equal rights amendment to the Constitution. So far, so good, right? So far, so good. They're opposed to abortion, communism, socialism, the equal rights amendment, which would have been, that was Phyllis Schlafly was fighting that tooth and nail. Homosexuality, sex education in schools. They're opposed to gun control. They're opposed to the United Nations, court-ordered busing, and, of course, long hair on boys and men. Okay, there you go. They support prayer in schools and the death penalty, and they're concerned about governments called tyrannical. All right, so there you go. Now, I don't want my talking about this article or Mr. Sullivan to be an endorsement of him, because I don't know even if he's alive anymore. I know Peter Hoagland isn't, but I don't know what all he believed. I don't know what he believed about Israel. I've done a little research today, and I'm not sure he and I would agree on some of the issues related to Israel. But that being said, this is not an endorsement of all things Mr. Pastor Sullivan. But so far, he's anti-communist. He's opposed to socialism. He was opposed to the Equal Rights Amendment. He's opposed to abortion, homosexuality, gun control, the United Nations. Well, there you go. Pretty traditional stuff as far as conservative Christians go, right? In interviews, Mr. Sullivan and a score of other fundamentalists, one point stood out. They believe that the state and federal government are encroaching on their ministries in a tyrannical fashion. They cite state certification of church schools, fire codes, zoning laws, investigations of some churches by the Internal Revenue Service, and a new law requiring churches to pay Social Security taxes on their employees. I'm going to stop there. The article's longer. It did say the decision was, Mr. Sullivan's school was ordered to shut in 1979. The decision was upheld by the Nebraska Supreme Court, and in 1981, the Supreme Court of the United States declined to review the case. Since then, the church has been padlocked several times. Mr. Sullivan has been to jail several times. Hundreds of ministers from across the country have come to lend their support. And until this week, the school remained open in defiance of court orders. And at some point, this thing got settled. They had a compromising legislation. And one of the assistant press secretaries for President Reagan said that President Reagan was glad to hear this thing got settled. Now, nothing has really changed. We're still fighting some of these same things. Many Christian schools today can operate without teacher licensure, but many of them want it because, again, it gives credibility to their school, they feel, and they don't want their teachers to have to go through continuing education, much less their initial training, having to embrace all kinds of perversion to get their certificate of teaching, which is common sense. Now, with that being said, Logan, are we ready? Here is the audio. Again, I think I'm one of the only people to have it, and now you're going to have it. And this, again, was a radio interview between Pastor Sullivan and then State Senator Peter Hoagland, who went on to become a congressman. Listen to this interview. The quote that has gone viral over the years and within Christian circles is here. You're finally going to hear the what I had for years, which was the accurate rendering. You're going to hear it because some people, again, have changed it up, said he talked about parents not being able to educate their kids because they won't fit in with the New World Order. That's not what he said. Listen to this debate. Here we go.
The Christian school issue may come before the legislature again tomorrow. The basic issue involves the state's obligation to make sure children are getting a proper education and the rights of churches to operate without state control. The unicameral bill to reach a middle ground somewhere in between there may come up again tomorrow. As we said, with us to shed some light on this today, live at 5, is the Reverend Everett Sullivan of Faith Baptist Church in Louisville, Nebraska, and State Senator Peter Hoagland of them. Senator Hoagland, you are against the bill to reach a middle ground. You favor the requirement on the church schools. Reverend Sullivan has brought up an argument. Many other states do not require teacher certification. They let their state, their Christian schools operate pretty much the way they want to, with some restrictions. Why shouldn't Nebraska be that way? We are in a minority.
Well, Joni, I would not agree with your characterization that the bill reaches a middle ground. The issue is really quite simple. Are we going to require that all schools in the state of Nebraska have certified, qualified, professionally trained teachers in the classroom, or are we going to waive those requirements in some circumstances? It's really all one or the other, and we have tried to find a middle ground, but frankly, I don't think there is one. I think you either are in favor of certification or you're not.
Look, Reverend Sullivan, is teacher certification that big of a thing to ask for?
Yes, it is for us. Teacher certification and quality have nothing in common as far as we're concerned. Teacher certification didn't come on the scene until early 1900s. Before that time, there was still quality education. And it's being proven every day in the fundamentalist schools across America that quality education can be had without certification. The teacher that I now have has a degree from a 4-year college in elementary and secondary education. Very qualified, but not certified.
How would you propose then, if the state is so worried about quality education, how would you propose that they look over and perhaps your school is offering quality education? What if the next Christian school or other church-affiliated school does not? How would you propose they watch over that?
Well, I believe that the state does have an interest in the education of its children. I do not believe that it has an interest in regulating all schools alike. That's a monopoly on education, which the state has no right to. Therefore, our parents have offered to give the state attendance records and also certified test results from national standardized tests. Now, I realize that the argument is that testing is not a panacea, but neither is certification. It's just a trade-off. It's a method whereby you can check the quality.
What is wrong with testing as a way of checking the quality of education being offered there?
Well, testing, first of all, was after the fact, Joni, and, the damage could be done by the time the test, 2 or 3 or 4 years down the road, we feel that. what we're most interested in, of course, are the children themselves. I don't think any of us in the legislature have any quarrel with the right of the reverend or the members of his flock to practice their religion. But we don't think that they should be entitled to impose decisions or religious philosophies on their children, which could seriously undermine those children's ability to deal in this complicated world when they grow up. We have an incredibly free society in America. In the business area, there's some regulation, and of course we all have to pay taxes. But when you get beyond that, especially in children's lives, there's just an amazing amount of variety of things that kids can do with very, very few restrictions. And I just don't think it's too much to ask that children during the school year spend 40 hours out of every week attending classes where
That's it. That's the quote. Now, it's been misattributed in parts online. I've had it correct in my stuff for years, and you've just heard it. It's documented. Can you believe that? We don't think parents have the right to indoctrinate their children, to make it difficult for them to grow up in this complicated world? This is, again, what we're dealing with today. This was, again, a radio interview between the pastor of that church and Pastor Sullivan, and then State Senator Peter Hoagland, who went on to become a congressman. Now, he passed away. He passed away in October 30th of 2007 at the age of 65. By the way, he was supposedly a member of an Episcopalian church. Well, we know about the Episcopalians now, don't we? Remember all they've been saying the last few weeks and months on the whole gay issue and everything else, homosexual issue, LGBTQ issue. The state wants to regulate what the kids learn and put these shackles, and they literally did shackle this church, padlock this church, and put the pastor and some of the dads in jail for a while. And to think that the state, when we now know how corrupt most of our states are, most of these state educators at the state level, how corrupt and perverted they are, and now these very same institutions are putting textbooks in the school, literally the books, if we showed them on terrestrial television, you could be charged with obscenity. And yet these are being shown to 8, 9, 10-year-old kids. We have one I'm reporting on tonight on the Worldview Report. A child brought home a book on gay pride and all kinds of things that I don't even want to get into. And this was a kindergartner. These are the people that want to make sure that our Christian kids in the Christian colleges of Minnesota are being certified, or the teachers are being certified in the Christian schools. Why? Because they hate your Christian worldview. They want to brainwash your kids, and they want to take over your Christian schools. So they're really not Christian in anything but name anymore. And they will eventually try to come after the homeschoolers. That's been a fight. And that's going to increase. Just because we have this little window with President Trump doesn't mean that this battle is over at the state level, just as the people of Minnesota are finding. But there it is. And I'm so thankful that providentially God allowed us to keep that cassette tape, that it didn't get too hot in an attic and quit working, and then we have it. Because I think we're the only one that has it, because we looked for a long time for this. And then someone sent it to us, and there you go. Very, very interesting. We'll get an update from Aaron on the other side of the break. Don't go away.
Hello, I'm
What were you
Brandon
saying,
House.
Logan?
I want to thank you for all your support at wvwfoundation.com that helps make possible pushing out 24/7 content for free. Without your support, we'd have to put it all behind a paywall. But thanks to you and your support through our foundation, we're able to push it out for free as a broadcast service and broadcast ministry of WVW Foundation. Please consider going there and setting up an automatic monthly contribution, or go there and make an occasional contribution. If you prefer to support us through the mail, you'll find our mailing address there at wvwfoundation.com. You can also call and make your contribution over the phone by calling 901-825-0652. That's 901-825-0652. Again, all these details are available at wvwfoundation.com. Thank you for your support as we try to help people around the world understand the times through the lens of a Christian worldview.
All right, welcome back. Glad glad you're with us. Let's go really quick to Israel, to our reporter on the ground, brought to you by our foundation, worldviewfoundation.com. We've got good news and bad news. I guess we had some hostages released, more coming, but sadly that mother who was taken on October 7th with her 2 children, supposedly the 2 children and the mother are dead, and their bodies will be returned this week. We only got 8 minutes, so we're going to have to go really fast, Aaron. Give us an update, please.
Right on, Brandon. We got some good news and bad news. The good news is on Shabbat Saturday, we're going to be getting 6 more of our people back home alive. The families are excited. The bad news, as you said, it's approximately 8 people in 2 days' time. On Thursday, we will be receiving back, I don't know how, Brandon, in body bags, bones, skeleton. I don't know. No one knows what shape they're going to be in. But the grieving families are going to be waiting. And there we go, a picture of what looks likely, according to what Hamas have said, that she and the children are going to be, they didn't say they're dead, but they're going to be coming home this Thursday, and they said it's going to be the dead ones that are coming home this Thursday. Tragedy, going to be a tough day for sure on Thursday, especially for the families. Those are close to them. On the other hand, it's going to be a time that they can, in a way, put closure to all of these exactly 500 days of suffering, madness, sickness.
Now, the father has been released already, correct?
The father was released just recently. Absolutely. He's home. He's safe. And he was just as shocked and sickened as everyone in the country was to hear that news today, that it looks like the rest of his family are dead.
And, of course, we don't have any indication as to how long they've been dead. But, of course, when they get the remains, your doctors and coroners will be able to give a date.
That's right, Brandon. But the thing is, what do these animals do with dead bodies for weeks, months?
Well, that's what my wife said. My wife asked me that when I told her. I said, "Oh, honey, come here and look at this." And I showed her the picture of this lady and her 2 children. And I said, "Remember us? We saw that on October 7th. We were tracking her story. Everybody's been wondering about her and those 2 children, and they're dead." And my wife said, "How long?" I said, "I have no idea." And she said, "Well, if they've been dead for months, were they just been keeping their bodies?" I said, "Apparently,
right.
They need something. They wanted something to trade, right, for some hostages."
Yeah.
From their quote hostages. They're terrorists.
Yeah. Well, these sick people will do anything. They don't care. They celebrate death. They glorify in death. So, the sky's the limit for these people.
Okay, so what else is going on in the region? We're getting reports about Samaria, Judea and Samaria, that some of these released terrorists are going to be running back to Judea and Samaria. Remember, you and I have talked, and I've shared my concerns about Judea and Samaria so many times, being right there on the border with Jordan, correct?
Absolutely. We're going to be giving back 600 more terrorists. 187 of them are in prison for murder. This is tough time, Brandon. But it's like we've got no choice. Well, we do, but we don't. And this is what we're going to go through. They're going to go back into Judea and Samaria, some of them. So our security better know what they're doing. They better know. They better be ready. They better be waiting. And hopefully they will go in straight away and take them out. We don't know. We don't know what they've got planned. We're hoping. We're trusting in our military. We don't have a choice.
Well, let me tell you what they need to do. They need to put some kind of tracker on these dogs.
Yeah.
I don't mean something cut off. I mean, I don't know, put something in their food, let them pass out at night, go to sleep, go night-night, and then while they're sleeping and they think they just fell asleep or whatever they can do to them over there, they could literally inject them with something that puts a permanent tracker on them and they don't even know it. They better track these dogs.
Brennan, with the story of the pages, anything's possible.
That's right.
That gives us hope.
I'm venturing to guess what I'm proposing has already been thought of by your team.
I hope so. But yeah, very tough day. But the fighting is raging in Judea and Samaria. We're taking out terrorists in places like Jenin, Tulkarm, mainly in Samaria.
What do you mean when you say the fighting is raging? They're going door to door grabbing up terrorists?
Absolutely. When the ceasefire began in the Gaza Strip almost a month ago, straight away we waged what's called Operation Iron Wall inside Judea and Samaria because Hamas are also wedged in there, and we know where terror cells are. We've been taking out terrorists. We have been going to some degree door to door. We have an incredible military intelligence inside there, and about 13,000 of them have left. They've gone to places like Jordan. So we're making inroads into these areas, these Hamas strongholds of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank.
All right. Let's see. What else do we have? We have let's see. Israel's U.S. ambassador on Egyptian military buildup, not tolerable. They're building up in the Sinai, correct? Egypt?
Brandon, I'm telling you, I've heard some first-hand reports from majors in the Israeli Defense Force, as well as our ambassador, Yechiel Leiter. It's quite concerning, to put it mildly. Egypt, they've got thousands of tanks on our border, which is, by the way, breaking the Camp David peace accords that Israel has had with Egypt for over 50 years. There is grave concern. Egypt are not happy with Trump's plans. And on the 27th of February, all the Arab nations are supposed to meet together to discuss a counter plan to Donald Trump's. Today, I just read it's been postponed another week to the 4th of March. I don't know why they've postponed it, but they are trying to come up with a counter plan. None of them are happy with Trump's plan, but let's see what they come up with. Let's see if they can come up with something. But in the meantime, Trump and all his team who are here at the moment, what's the name of the Secretary of State?
Marco Rubio. People like Lindsey Graham, others are here. I mean, it's wonderful for our relationship with America. We've got B-52s from America flying over here with F-15 jets, flexing a little bit of muscle to the neighbors. They're not just flexing muscle. I think they're getting ready for a strike on Iran.
Well, that's been a massive part of the talks in these few days that they've been here. Absolutely. Lindsey Graham is he's saying that time is running out. He's actually putting pressure on Trump, not on Bibi. He's saying, Donald Trump, time is running out. So this is something is going down, but at least there's very good relationships between America and Israel at the moment. And America have given Israel thousands of tons worth of bombs, heavy-duty bombs. So I agree with you. It's more than just flexing muscle.
Hold right there, Aaron. LightsOfTheNationsMinistry.com, brought to you by our foundation, our reporter on the ground, WorldviewFoundation.com. Stay tuned for Crosstalk. Thanks for listening. Take care. And we're back with WROS out of Jacksonville, Florida, and Worldview Tube. Let's go back to Aaron real quick. Aaron, I do indeed believe that they are preparing. Got something in my ear there. Rubio meets with Netanyahu, vowing there can never be a nuclear Iran. That's one of the articles at worldviewreport.com, your daily aggregated news site. So again, I think they're getting ready for a strike.
Yeah, I agree. I think they are. I hope they are. In the meantime, this is quite concerning, having Egypt arming on our border. The last thing we want is an eighth front to fight. And the other big concern, Brennan, is that we have been able to stop Iran sending ammunitions into Hezbollah in Lebanon. We've been able to do that, but we have discovered through our intelligence that the Iranians have found a new way to get ammunition to Hezbollah, and it's through Turkey. Turkey are collaborating with Iran. Now, Turkey are Sunni Muslims, Iran are Shiites, and yet they are collaborating. Why? Because they have a common enemy, and that's Israel. So we're very concerned that more ammunition is getting through to Hezbollah in South Lebanon. So this war is far from over. If anyone thinks it's over, it is not. There's a ceasefire, but we're getting prepared, and thank God that America have been able to equip us. I read a list. I don't have it with me here. I'm up in the Galilee tonight, but I read a list of some of the equipment that America gave us. It's some very heavy-duty stuff.
All right. And of course, sadly, we're now finding out more and more about our federal government funding terrorism, Islamic terrorism. So here we are helping you while the Biden regime and USAID was giving billions of dollars to terrorists. Of course, supposedly of millions of dollars of for condoms for the Gaza, which, I don't know. I would be more for castration for Gazan men than I am for just giving them condoms. But I do agree they should not be procreating.
Well, I can tell you a lot of the Hezbollah operatives won't be procreating because apparently a lot of their pages were in their pockets around their hip area.
Well, good.
So that's for sure.
Well, good. They're going to have a hard time raping those Israeli women when they don't have, male body parts left, right?
Yeah. And on that issue, Brandon, I've heard reports that there could well have been some babies born in captivity, and those babies were taken from those mothers. No one knows where they are now. Some of the girls who have been released have been sharing their experiences, and some of them were saying that these Muslim Hamas and Palestinian people, they were saying, looking at them in their face, and they said, we're going to convert you to Islam. You're going to be our brides. You're going to give birth to our children. You're going to live a Muslim life for the rest of your life. You'll never get out of here. Can you imagine some of these young girls being told that by terrorists? How terrifying. Yeah. It makes their recovery and release even more joyful.
I told my wife, if I were in charge over there and you're trading these guys for hostages, I can understand the desires of the family member to get their loved ones back. So I understand that. I'm not sure I agree with all of it when you release hundreds of terrorists to go kill as many as you're getting released, but I totally get it. I would want all my family members back, and I'd be for that deal if that were my situation. But I'll tell you this, I would be, again, tracking every one of these dogs. And when this was all over and I had everybody back, I would send out my guys, my black op teams, and I would eliminate every one of these guys. I would eliminate every one of them. I'd slit their throat, put a bullet in their head with my special forces, whatever had to be done. Every one of these guys would be dead. But as soon as we're done negotiating, as soon as we got back what we want, there would, and if they want to brag about it later, fine. If not, just say, I don't know. Isn't that interesting? They died of lead poisoning.
Brandon, as a believer, I pray for their souls. I pray that they would repent. I pray for their salvation. My second prayer is that God will judge them. If they don't repent, God will judge them and have vengeance on the blood shed on the women that are raped. They deserve it. If they're not going to repent, then God judge them.
Yeah, and God uses governments to often judge. God uses military to bring judgment. That's in the Old Testament as well. Right, Aaron?
Absolutely. No question about it.
And we see in the New Testament that the government does not bear the sword in vain. Government has the right to kill people. They go around raping and murdering other people. LightToTheNationsMinistry.com, LightToTheNationsMinistry.com. Thank you for the update, Aaron.
Brandon, God bless. Thank you.
Be safe, my friend. Aaron Lavarco checking in, brought to you by our foundation, WorldviewFoundation.com. We send him regular love offerings, but we can only do that if you support us, so please consider doing that now. WorldviewFoundation.com, WorldviewFoundation.com. Don't forget, you can go to WorldviewStore.com right now. We are getting a lot of you requesting the pack of 20 business cards. They come in a pack of 20. You give those away to family and friends. Tell them about us and order another pack. They're free. WorldviewStore.com. Take care.
You're watching Worldview 2, built on the 35 years of Worldview books, documentaries, research, high-profile interviews, and the radio and television broadcasts of Brannon House.
Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the National Security Team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the Vice Commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
Since September 11th, 2001, we've lost over 150,000 veterans to suicide. That's not just a statistic. That's 150,000 brothers and sisters who carried the weight of service only to face their darkest battles alone on home soil. What's even more troubling is the approach we've taken to address this crisis. We're looking at a system that often responds to mental health struggles by prescribing medications that, of all things, can increase the very thoughts we're trying to combat. Think about that for a moment. We're giving our veterans who may already be wrestling with suicidal thoughts medications that list suicidal ideation as a potential side effect. This isn't just counterintuitive. In many cases, it's outright dangerous. The Department of Veterans Affairs just released their 2024 suicide report. And behind the carefully crafted statistics and methodically chosen metrics, these harsh realities remain. Today, we'll hear from veterans working directly in this space who witness these challenges firsthand and are actively seeking solutions. We'll also hear the positions from veteran service organizations who are leading the conversations around this dialogue, and we'll conclude with insights from Congressman Mike Boss, Chairman of the House Veterans Affairs Committee, whose oversight role provides a crucial window into the policy shaping veteran mental health care in the United States. The message could not be clearer. What we are doing is not working. The status quo isn't just failing, it is costing lives. The numbers in this report, however they're presented, represent real people, real families, and real loss. It's time to have the courage to try something different, to be truly honest with ourselves about the care we're providing to our nation's veterans, to explore alternative approaches that treat our veterans as whole human beings, not just collections of symptoms to be medicated.
Where lies the truth? Ending veteran suicide. Welcome back to Transition Tuesday. The Rob Maness Show is live on Worldview Tube, X-Spaces Simulcast, Rumble, YouTube, Truth Social Plus, and Roku. And I've probably forgotten one. Well, you just saw that right there. That's the opening from today's guest's podcast. You can find it on YouTube at the Grunt Style Foundation. And it's titled Gaslighting America's Veterans, I believe. And all the clips today are from that show that I normally show a clip at the beginning of each segment. And the Department of Veterans Affairs released that 2024 report. I got a copy printed out of the findings, the second volume of it, that's a half an inch thick. They let it out a few weeks ago. And while there is a lot of information in the report, there really is. The bottom line is we are not adequately addressing this issue. In a press release, the Grunt Style Foundation is publicly calling for an immediate investigation into the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs suicide prevention program spending and its effectiveness. And they're absolutely right. Let me just quote them. Quote, "The numbers don't lie, and neither will I. We're losing the battle while drowning in bureaucracy," said the president of the Grunt Style Foundation. Another quote, "Every day we lose 17 of our brothers and sisters to suicide." And that's not just a statistic. Those are our friends, our battle buddies, our family members. The VA's current budget allocates approximately $570 million just for suicide prevention initiatives. And yet the crisis continues to worsen. He further states, this is part of a larger $13 billion mental health budget that isn't delivering the results that our veterans and their families desperately need, close quote. Well, my guest today said those words. He's a co-owner of Grunt Style, a Marine combat veteran and entrepreneur, Tim Jensen. Tim started in 2013 with the company folding T-shirts for just over minimum wage. And today, he develops the brand as the chief brand officer of Grunt Style itself, but he also is the president of the board of directors of Grunt Style Foundation, which is their 501c3, focused on empowering veterans to create a better life for themselves and contribute to the community in which they live, not kill themselves. we're against that. And that's why I wanted him to come on the show this week. He's done a couple of other shows, did a big space last week with Shell and Chad Caton, who's a friend of our show and everything. But this is critically important that we continue to talk about this issue, and not just that, but get action on it. Tim Jensen, it's good to see you again, man. Welcome to the Rob Main Show.
Colonel, it's great to see you again. And, for those that are keeping track, the Colonel and I, many, many, many years ago, we took a ride once around D.C. and liberated every one of the national monuments during sequestration and took all of those barriers and threw them into the White House lawn. And I'm very proud of that. That was one of the very first things I did for Grunt Style. And here we are many, many years later, fighting another fight. And, this one is just as big, just as impactful, and has the ability of impacting just as many lives.
That's right, man. I'll never forget that October, the Million Veterans March. It was kind of a foggy morning and cold, and you guys roll up in that car in front of the subway, which the opposite of the guy that ran my political campaign that year, a U.S. Senate race, was above the subway there, just upside of Capitol Hill there, and that opened the trunk, and there's my T-shirts. The first Grunt Style T-shirts I've ever bought was a mass order for the U.S. Senate race that Rob Maness ran, and I met all you guys that day, and then we went and did the march, and the rest is history, man. And it is history. I mean, that was in 2013. My gosh. Yeah. I'm getting a lot older. You're not aging at all. I noticed that when I saw you guys in person a while back. But, man, I'm so glad you're doing this because you're taking this brand and this little company that was started by you guys, by veterans, is run by veterans, and you're making inroads into this, and I just am so pleased and blessed to have you on the show to talk about this report and talk about. I don't know if you heard my intro, but I use a clip at the beginning of every segment. All the clips come from your Gaslighting America's Veterans show that you did for I think 2 hours and 40 minutes or so with those great guests. So we don't have to talk about what's in the clips. We can talk about whatever you want. But this report, man, I can see why you're calling for an investigation. And I told the crowd before that was listening on Spaces before the show started that go get a beer or whatever your favorite beverage is, sit down in a quiet room with the door closed and watch this show, Gaslighting America's Veterans, that Grunt Style Foundation put out, because it's going to make you angry, but it's also going to open your eyes.
It's absolutely incredible. We've been looking at this for some time. The foundation is only 3 years old. However, from the work that Grunt Style has been doing, well over 15 years now, suicide has been in the front seat of our work for the very beginning. Like it was some of the very big first issues that we were working on, and here we are today. That the problem is still as dire as it was then, if not worse. We're far more people dying on an annual basis. Far more money is being spent on this than it was back then in 2013, and the outcomes are no different. And I have to ask myself the question, like, what the hell is going on, right? If we look back at, the line was struck in 2001. That's when the VA started saying that they're measuring veteran suicides. And from 2001 to 2020, we didn't hear anything, right? We just heard 22 a day, push-ups, awareness. And then they started, developing these suicide reports, and a picture started to be painted. Well, here we are, 2025, the VA, is 2 years, these reports generally lag 2 years, so we're not getting real-time information. And, the information that we are getting is just, it's dire. It's obfuscated in a bunch of layered language that, the average veteran would never be able to get through. I, honestly don't even read it any longer. Now with the advent of ChatGPT, I just ran this thing through ChatGPT and said, give me the summary. And it pooped out everything I needed to know. That, they're still not talking about antidepressants and psychotropics inside of the report. They're not talking about any of the meaningful data that they have at their fingertips that they just won't release to us, like how many people are, how long have patients within the system been on psychotropics, right? How many of them are committing suicide while on these medicines? They don't want to release that information. So we had to go out and start mining the information ourselves. And the first thing that I did was I hired a professional. And it was by the name of an individual by the name of Derek Bloomkey. He's been working on this issue for well over a decade, has all of the data that the VA is hiding, and we started learning a lot of weird and frankly terrifying statistics. Here's one for you: 68% of all of the individuals that are currently in the VHA care, meaning they're enrolled in the healthcare program, 68% of them are on psychotropics. That's about, wow. That's a big number. A big number, right? Yeah. And of that, then you got another 25% of those individuals that are on antidepressants. So, what is the strategy that we are developing and deploying within the biggest medical system in the United States, if not the planet, that is treating more than half of the cohort with poison or pills that are psychotropic in nature, that affect the mind, to balance the chemicals of the brain, and often increase suicidal ideations when you're participating in using these medicines. But we believe, or the VA in its strategies of deployment of these medicines, feels that it is the best foot forward in combating these issues of TBI, anxiety, PTSD, all these different things by the cocktail of medicine I use loosely, that they prescribe. This is no different than what we saw years ago with the opioid epidemic. In fact, the numbers were almost very similar. It was something to the tune of 68 to 70% of those inside the VHA were addicted to opioids, and they drove that number down to damn near zero. But they don't want to touch anything when it comes to the mental health of these individuals, and they just want to continue prescribing, medicines that, if you had a choice as a civilian, right, you could take the generic version, or you could take the preferred white label version, or the preferred version, right? Well, here's what the VA is doing, right? And I'll use trazodone as an example, right? They would rather deploy trazodone into the cohort rather than Ambien, its counterpart. With trazodone, you get a 61% higher rate of suicidal ideation in comparison to its counterpart Ambien. Why do we not choose Ambien? Well, it's a bit more expensive, and we believe that the veteran isn't worth it. Like, what are we talking about? This is ridiculous.
That's one of the problems with government health care. Look, I'm a VA patient. That's where I started a couple of years ago when I moved close to a VA facility under my primary care there. And that's one of the problems. Say that again. What's the name of that drug again? It's the generic of Ambien?
Yeah, trazodone, the generic of Ambien. Widely prescribed within the VA, a 61% higher chance of suicidal ideation than its counterpart. But hey, let's keep issuing that out. And you know what? Let's do even one better. Let's pair it with another crazy psychoactive compound called Paxil or Zoloft, and then increase those percentage points. Like 10, 20 points.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we got to take a commercial break, Tim. When we come back, we'll see another clip. And everything. I think this one's from Nick Pomascano of Ranger Up, and we could discuss that. But I want to keep talking about these drugs and get some of the names, some more of the names.